Good afternoon, everyone. In the wake of presidential abuses of power during the Nixon administration, Congress responded with a broad set of reforms to strengthen the institutions of our democracy. New campaign finance and ethics laws were put in place, along with transparency requirements, including mandatory financial disclosures. Offices of Inspector General were stood up to search out corruption and malfeasance. Congressional committees were organized to oversee intelligence agencies, and the President's power to declare war was circumscribed. These post-Watergate reforms and others did a great deal to preserve the balance of power for much of the last half-century. But many of these limits on executive power have been worn away by successive presidents after Nixon, bent on putting the imperial back in an imperial presidency. Still, the reforms post-Watergate served our country well and adequately until the last 4 years. During the last administration, so many of the Nixon-era norms were broken down, exposing new vulnerabilities to our democracy. The wall separating the White House from the Justice Department was obliterated. The Hatch Act, which prohibits the use of federal employees and federal property as instruments of a presidential campaign, was not only violated, but proudly and flagrantly so. The Emoluments Clause of the Constitution proved impossibly difficult to effectively enforce. The pardon power was abused to shield those covering up for the president. The Impoundment Act was violated with impunity, and Congress's power of the purse was usurped. The temporary appointment of Senate confirmable positions was used to evade the need for Senate approval, and foreign powers were solicited and coerced in an effort to obtain help in presidential elections. In the wake of these attacks on our system of checks and balances, it is time for our own set of democracy-affirming reforms, just as Congress put forward in the 1970s. Because of the abuses of the last several years are more sweeping in nature than anything undertaken during the Nixon administration, and ultimately led to a violent attack on our Capitol, the need for stronger guardrails is greater than ever. Today, the Congress took up the Protecting Our Democracy Act to address many of the vulnerabilities that the last 4 years exposed. Of particular significance, the bill would expedite enforcement of congressional subpoenas, the necessity of which is being demonstrated in real time as top officials in the former administration once again seek to stonewall subpoenas and prevent the public from learning of their role in the January 6th insurrection. A Congress that cannot enforce its subpoenas is no more a Congress than a court would remain a court without the power to compel witnesses to testify at trial. Instead, it becomes a kind of plaything for a despot. Although the Trump presidency demonstrated the need for wholesale reinforcement of our democratic institutions, the Protecting Our Democracy Act is less about the past than it is about the future. The bill's provisions address many of the deficiencies revealed, not as a punishment of the last president who is now beyond legislative reach, but to guard against any future president of either party who would be tempted to make themselves a king. Many of the protections in the POTA have been enjoyed bipartisan support in the past. In fact, many of these provisions had once been authored by Republicans, and one would expect they would be embraced by the GOP as desirable limits on the current Democratic administration. The Protecting Our Democracy Act is a natural complement to H.R. 1 and the John Lewis voting rights legislation as part of our pro-democracy agenda. This is a precarious moment in the long history of our struggle for a more perfect union, when the fate of our democracy is once again in question. We must rise to meet that moment, and I'm grateful that the Congress has begun that process with passing the Protection of Our Democracy Act. This legislation is the product of work by many hands, many committee chairs and members, but no one more so than the Speaker of the House, who has stood as a bulwark defending our democracy since her election to Congress, but most particularly over the last several years. And I'm very proud to introduce the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi.